President Trump will meet with members of Congress on Wednesday to discuss gun violence. He met with the nation's governors today on the same topic. As usual with such meetings, not much happened. We can always hope, but with few exceptions, the governors are not expected to do much, not until or unless considerably more pressure is put on them. That pressure could come from the stunning work of American children fighting for their lives. In less than 2 weeks, a handful of high school students from Parkland, Florida have inspired walkouts at schools around the country and a national march planned for the 24th. Won concessions on gun policy from President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Rick Scott, Senator Marco Rubio, and others, sometimes face to face. And they have cost the NRA partnerships with more than a dozen companies. The NRA and its backers have, in return, gone after these children, in some cases issuing death threats. It is beneath contempt and accomplishes little but to illuminate starkly who we are dealing with on both sides. And anyone who thinks that vile rhetoric will scare off these young people doesn't know America's young people or America's history. If we are in the midst of a sea change in America's attitude toward guns, if this is a tipping point in our tolerance for massacres of children, it will be because of young people. Today's young people are written off every day as entitled social media junkies by grown-ups who ignored global warming and heightened economic inequality. So, we should not be surprised to find young people setting about fixing another problem that we let fester and spread. It should not be a surprise because it's often young people who get it right. Young people who desegregated our schools, holding textbooks close as grown-ups shrieked hatred and rage. Young people led the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, Alabama, and were met with violence. 3 young people were murdered in Mississippi fighting for voting rights. Young people marched for civil rights, against Vietnam, for AIDS patients, for gay rights, against the Iraq War, against Wall Street, for women, for black lives. Throughout our modern history, young people have led while grown-ups, fearful of change or crippled by compromise and complacency, dismissed and ridiculed young people, and ultimately followed them. It is grotesque that victims of injustice and survivors of trauma so often bear the burden of making this a more perfect union. And it is grotesque how seldom we listen when they are not young people. Too often we demand purity from those who seek change. We look for ulterior motives, anything to undermine the call for action. Only the innocent enjoy the presumption of innocence. So when political figures like James Brady or Gabby Giffords are shot, they are instantly marginalized. When young black people fight guns on the streets of Chicago or misuse of them in the hands of police, they are ignored or defamed. The Parkland students mostly look like the NRA. That is, they're too young, too white, too mainstream for the right to question them. That's why their attackers target their authenticity. It is their weapon and their armor. So, the NRA will continue to chip away at their sincerity and their motives, hoping to erode their power over time, because every generation's fight is a desperate race to achieve progress before their activism is turned against them as proof of bias. So we owe it to them to keep paying attention to them, to repel the attacks on them, and to expand the circle of voices we listen to. Black kids fighting for their lives, Latino kids fighting for their homes, transgender kids fighting for their identities, gay kids, Muslim kids, even 86-year-old kids. The lesson of Parkland is bigger than just guns. The lesson is to stop judging our warriors for change based on who they are and start joining them based on what they stand for. The NRA's greatest ally in this generational battle is time. We'll see the gun lobby try to diffuse the mounting pressure by beginning discussion on marginal tweaks to our gun laws. They'll talk about it at least. We'll see the NRA dig in its heels to wait out the moment in which we find ourselves to counteract the momentum that might otherwise make this a tipping point. And we'll see a jiu-jitsu of sorts as the gun lobby turns the threat of guns into a rallying cry for more guns, more police, and a more militant nation, all of which require time, all of which put off the day of real, meaningful change. Slow everything down, wear everyone out, wind up where you were before. We're seeing it play out already. President Trump is talking about possibly banning bump stocks. He's looking at background checks and limiting gun ownership based on mental illness or age. That's what he says anyway. The willingness to talk is admirable, but these measures won't stop the scourge of automatic rifles, for example. They won't end our epidemic of suicides, accidental shootings, or asinine stand-your-ground killings. None of it prevents leaders, including President Trump, from turning our schools into fortresses. Mr. Trump suggesting that 1 out of 5 teachers carry a gun in our classrooms. There are effective approaches. New York City has gun laws that are tough and effective, very effective. We could ban automatic and semi-automatic weapons. Ultimately, the surest path is simply to repeal the Second Amendment. It has been reinterpreted in ways its authors never imagined as a guarantee of individual gun rights and has become a kind of holy scripture against which no blasphemy may stand. Frankly, I don't see repeal happening in this generation. Our America is a gun culture and not likely to abandon its gospels. But if all we see is delay and incremental change to our gun laws, the question is simple. Will today's young people sit still for that or take direct aim at the legal foundation for so-called gun rights? It's hard to imagine even this generation of motivated young people accomplishing something so seemingly impossible. Then again, that's what young people do. On CNN this Sunday, I sat with Parkland survivor David Hogue, and we discussed this very question, whether he and his peers have the staying power they need to effect real change. Those forces who oppose what you're speaking of, they're depending on you wearing out, getting distracted, moving on to other things. That's their bet.
And I mean, that's kind of what the Florida legislatures were doing. They're trying to make us forget. There's a reason why only one Republican lawmaker at this Florida State House met with us. It's because I think that they want these people to forget. They want to just get reelected through name recognition and the incumbency advantage. And that's what they're trying to do, and we're not going to let that happen.
I don't know whether David and other students at Parkland and around the country will succeed, but every generation astonishes its elders with what they achieve. And I do believe that this generation will try their damnedest, that they will not go silent. The true test here is whether we listen. You know, as we watch one company after another cut ties with the NRA, it's tempting to believe its financial resources are withering away. Delta and United Airlines are gone. Avis, Hertz, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, MetLife, and Chubb Insurance. Under pressure from survivors of the Parkland school shooting, those companies and others, along with countless individuals, are rethinking their relationship to a group that used to be bipartisan, that used to be about firearms safety. But the NRA is so entwined with our economy and our politics that it draws its funding in ways we never see, from sources we never imagine. Last week, we told you about BlackRock, the big hedge fund investing in gun makers. But if you follow the money trail of the NRA's big individual backers, it turns out one of them made their fortune, in part, off the deadly epidemic of painkiller addiction. The NRA's website spotlights a handful of donors called Ring of Freedom members. One of them is Susie Brewster, co-founder of the NRA's Women's Leadership Forum.
Wouldn't it be much better to know what to do if you were faced with a firearm that you could defend? So I believe that the sole purpose of the NRA is protection of the Second Amendment. You've just got to believe in that. If you believe in our Constitution, believe in America. And we just have a lot of personal responsibilities. And that Second Amendment is very important to me, the right to be able to defend ourselves and to have firearms.
A former teacher from Oklahoma, she is married to a former NRA board member, Bill Brewster. Bill Brewster used to be a Democratic member of Congress representing Oklahoma. Then he became a lobbyist, co-founder of Capitol Hill Consulting Group. Capitol Hill Consulting has taken in millions of dollars from companies including Aetna, Cigna, Eli Lilly, and Equifax. But one of Bill Brewster's clients in particular jumps out. His company is a lobbyist for Purdue Pharma. He personally lobbied for Purdue Pharma from 2003 through 2015. That's 12 years lobbying for the company that created OxyContin and pushed it on doctors and patients. The company that then hired lobbyists to block efforts to fight the epidemic of painkiller abuse and death. All told, Purdue Pharma has paid Brewster's company more than $1.6 million. We don't know exactly what Brewster did for Purdue to earn that money. His 2003 registration form says, and I quote, "general pharmaceutical issues," unquote. But later forms do list more specifics about prescription drugs, including, quote, "issues related to prescription drug abuse." And then there's former Congresswoman Mary Bono. 2 years ago, Bono told reporters about a meeting she had with a Purdue lobbyist in 2010 about her Stop Oxy Abuse Act bill to severely cut down OxyContin prescriptions. The lobbyist, she says, threatened to pull Purdue's funding for drug abuse programs in her state. That lobbyist was Bill Brewster, who recalled the meeting as, and I quote, "cordial and constructive." Federal forms show Brewster was lobbying for Purdue at the time, including specifically the Stop Oxy Abuse Act. The bill died. Last year, the Brewsters gave $84,000 in political donations, mostly to Republican politicians who oppose gun control and the PACs they rely on. We contacted Bill Brewster's lobbying company to ask whether either of the couple supports any gun control measures being proposed by the Parkland survivors. As of airtime, we had received no comment. The weekend's release, after White House delays, of the Democratic memo on the FBI's Russia investigation is underscoring concerns already raised in corners of both parties about the fitness of Republican Congressman Devin Nunez to chair the House Intelligence Committee. And if the Democratic memo didn't significantly heighten concerns, Chairman Nunez did with his misleading, sometimes downright untruthful, reaction to it this weekend. The Democratic rebuttal, known as the Schiff memo, after ranking Democratic member Adam Schiff, effectively dynamites key claims Nunez made to the American people in his own memo, and with them, whatever credibility Chairman Nunez had left. First, consider the most venomous claim in the Nunez memo, the claim that the Department of Justice misled the judges of the secret court that rules on wiretap warrants, not telling the court that one source was a paid political operative. Set aside the fact that Chairman Nunez must surely know that law enforcement uses biased sources to toss people in jail every day, we still must confront the Schiff memo revelation that the judges actually were told that the source was paid by a law firm, quote, likely looking for information that could be used to discredit the Trump campaign. In response, Chairman Nunez shifted his argument this weekend, no longer claiming that the FBI didn't disclose it, now complaining about how they disclosed it.
In a footnote before the FISA court, they had put in a very convoluted, complicated answer for something that was, and it's buried at the end, okay, of the application, about that this was politically motivated. And you guys will all be able to read it shortly. However, wouldn't it have been a lot easier just to say, hey, Mr. Judge, we want to let you know that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party paid a lawyer who hired a firm who hired a foreign agent to go to the Russians and get dirt on Mr. Trump. It would have been a lot easier just to say that.
Keep in mind, Chairman Nunez just confirmed that the FBI did tell the judges, contradicting his own memo. And if that admission were not enough to disqualify him from the chairmanship, there was this stunning moment. Listen as Nunez, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, accuses Democrats of colluding with American law enforcement, claiming that the Democrats reveal their own cover-up in their own memo.
We want it out because we think it is clear evidence that the Democrats are not only trying to cover this up, but they're also colluding with parts of the government to help cover this up.
You can call it incoherence or incompetence. Either way, in pivoting politically, Chairman Nunez at every step ends up stipulating the basic fact that the special prosecutor is compiling. Russian interference, FBI disclosure of its sources, credible sources. All facts that, taken together, will paint a picture not too far down the road that may be far too indelible for Nunez to erase, in which case, maybe the best thing he could do for his country is not to resign and stay right where he is. Here's some other stories we're keeping an eye on and think you should. The High Court, the Supreme Court today, decided to let stand an injunction blocking President Trump from ending DACA next month. The fate of the Dreamers, immigrants brought here as children, now goes back to the courts, assuming Congress and the President don't fix it. A Japanese pharmaceutical company has announced it's developed a flu treatment capable of stopping the flu with one pill. The medication, called Zufloza, will be available in Japan in the next several months. U.S. approval of the drug could take a year or two. This year's flu season has been devastating here, with almost 100 children dead so far. Reported cases are dropping, raising hope that flu season may finally be winding down. Voters who tried to cast a ballot in last week's Wisconsin primaries got a nasty surprise. Dozens in Green Bay alone had been removed from the voting rolls. The state has been purging voters who do not reaffirm their registration. That's a tactic that has long been used in defense of voting integrity, which historically has the effect of disenfranchising genuine voters. The Supreme Court today heard a crucial case for the future of America's labor unions. The lawsuit challenges the right of unions to collect fees from workers who benefit from collective bargaining but don't want to pay their dues. The court has split on similar cases, meaning Trump appointee Neil Gorsuch could be the deciding vote on an issue that could decimate organized labor. Teachers in West Virginia remained on strike today, their third day of the strike. Teachers have not received a raise in 4 years, and rising health care costs have reduced take-home pay for many of them. State law prohibits collective bargaining, and the state is considering getting an injunction to force teachers back on the job. And finally tonight is this. Is it, or is it not, the moment when the tide begins to turn on gun violence in America? A tipping point when real change begins. By any objective analysis, the answer is maybe. It's probably strong odds against, but this appears to be the best opportunity in a long while. An opportunity to bring at least some common sense to bear on the issue. As I mentioned earlier, we aren't talking about repeal of the Second Amendment with passage of some new constitutional amendment. Much as many people might want that to happen, realistically, it's a non-starter for now. Perhaps, in future generations, but to talk about it happening anytime soon is unrealistic. But a few steps that might help with the overall problem do have a chance now. Steps such as, to name only a few, raising the age when guns can be bought, longer waiting periods for purchases, prohibitions on buying some of the more lethal weapons, those kinds of things. They may have a chance because of the public mood in the wake of the Parkland school murders in Florida and the determination of young people, students, to make a difference. An early indicator will be March 24th in Washington and around the country, the March for Our Lives national rally. The mission statement for the march reads, and I quote directly, "School safety is not a political issue. There cannot be two sides to doing everything in our power to ensure the lives and futures of children. No special interest group, no political agenda is more critical than timely passage of legislation to effectively address gun violence." End of quote. If the National March succeeds, new and possibly powerful momentum for change will result. If not, well, goodbye tide turning, adios tipping point. The crucial factor is whether the momentum can be kept alive until November and the midterm election. President Trump, powerful congressional members in both parties, and the NRA are betting it can't and won't. They are playing for time and activism fatigue, knowing that the ballot box, the vote, will be the ultimate decider. And what happens at the ballot box depends on whether we, all of us, go beyond lip service and sympathy, go beyond easy attaboys for these kids. It means the work of democracy, tracking legislation, keeping tabs on who's voting for and against it. It means spreading the word. There is one and only one scenario in which this moment of our history does turn out to be a tipping point. That is, if we make it so. With that, I'll leave you for this news cycle. The Young Turks is up next, and we'll be back with the news at this same place and time, 5:30 Eastern every Monday. Until then, Dan Rather reporting. I wish you good night, good luck, and Godspeed. Stay steady.